Hello and welcome to Inside Update, a podcast from InsideInvestigator.org, where we do nonprofit journalism to root out corruption in Connecticut. I'm here with Catherine Revelo. Catherine, how you doing?
Not too bad, Connor. How are you?
Life is good. I feel like recording these in the morning is a good way to go. Like we could just talk about all of the stuff we're excited about and then move on with the rest of our day. So I know we were just talking about how we were off mic, both of us up since 3:30 and 5:30. So this is not that early, but it feels like we're already well underway in our day. Um, I don't know. I guess I'm just bringing it up in the interest of transparency because that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today before we get to your investigation. We're going to talk about Association transparency and an awesome investigation you did, but you have been involved in transparency work for a long time before you came to work with Inside Investigator. And I was curious why? Like, why is it important to you? Why do you invest so much time and energy into that fight?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important to me because, it affects all of us. I grew up with my parents worked for the Navy. So DoD, notably not the most efficient government organization, but, you hear these stories about, you know, a federal department that is supposed to keep all of us safe. And, some of the things that they are doing and just basic, guidelines and such that they're not following. It's kind of horrifying. And, things that happen in the public affect everybody's life, whether, you're a taxpayer of Connecticut or not, just because you happen to live in an area or not live in an area, you're still affected by what government does. And I think particularly, the pandemic brought a lot of this into the light where, I happened to work for a news organization in Maine at the time, but I'm sure you guys saw a lot of it too, where, there were people who didn't know what was going on, who were trying to get in touch with government officials, and they, either didn't know where to go or had been unable to get into contact with people who can answer their questions. And, when you're faced with people who are kind of at the end of their rope and in these situations that they really need help, I think transparency is really important there.
Yeah. I didn't realize it was a family affair. Like it did was it I can imagine that it would be frustrating being inside working for one of these organizations and then on the outside, you're on both sides of this. Did your parents have those frustrations too?
Yeah, I think definitely right. My mom's a safety engineer. And so, that's kind of, the side of a lot of things that's standing up and saying, hey, no, you can't do this. And you're being told by people who don't want to listen, well, we're going to do it anyway. So, it's probably not, it's a frustrating situation to be in.
I guess that's why we have the whistleblower portal. Of course, anyone who works in any agency or business or just is aware of corruption, it's a tough thing to stand up and kind of shout that from the rooftops. Uh, Ideally, you could shout it in a protected room with a reporter you can trust and actually probably get more done to root out that corruption. Um, I also feel like it's the corner, transparency is so important to journalism, but not obviously just because it makes journalists' lives easier. It's because of what we can do with it. We're blessed to have this megaphone. We just crossed over 10,000 email subscribers the other day, and it's nice to have a little bit of space there to say, hey, if you have a problem, we're pretty sure that we could help fix it, right? And have more of a human angle. Uh, the accountability part, I'd be curious to get your thoughts on this as well, because we get the folks who reach out and they say, you have to accomplish this goal. You have to change this policy. You have to change this law. And I find myself doing a lot of education. And I think our reporting team does as well directly of just saying, we're not here to pick a side. We're not here to pick a battle or to advocate or to take a position other than anti-corruption. But I don't know. How do you deal with that when people are telling you that you need to pick their side or fight their battles for them?
Yeah, I'm right. I think it's like you say, it's education. It's as simple as, that is not the job, at least of good journalists. I think that certainly there are a lot of journalists out there, and, we all know that media bias exists in a lot of ways who do those things, but that's not journalism, that's PR. What our job as journalists to do is, to highlight issues that are happening and to collect facts and people's opinions and viewpoints, and to put those together in a way that is authentic and helps educate people and, gives a platform to those kinds of authentic experiences. And, sometimes that can come out in a way that looks biased, I think, right? There are cases, for example, where we've reported on actual corruption that's happening in the state. And yes, we take a side on that where we're saying, hey, this person is telling the truth. But, we're also backing that up with, concrete facts, right? You can see that's the case. But, that's not the same thing as going into a news piece and saying, like, this is my goal to, get this guy or to pass this bill, or something like that.
Yeah. And especially too, I mean, if government is kind of the low-hanging fruit when it comes to individuals or businesses, we need people who are willing to speak up. Government is unique in that there's freedom of information and there's other transparency mechanisms that sometimes they work that we can lean on. But in either case, I guess the problem is if you can hide behind the law instead of being accountable to the people you're supposed to serve, you're kind of already on the wrong side of what's going on. You're throwing up these roadblocks to. I'll mention that, I get curious about stuff that's happening in Connecticut and across the country, and I messaged you about this the other day. But I was requesting disciplinary records for some officers out in Colorado who had done some really horrendous things. They've already been found to be guilty. The city had to pay several $1 million. But I was curious, hey, what happened to make sure that this didn't happen again? And I got a quote for over $94,000 to even get those records. So I kind of, I wonder, is the mechanism there to actually make sure that transparency is happening? Because I don't know about you, I don't have $94,000 laying around that I could use just to get these records, which, again, it's just curiosity. I'm not really doing anything with them, but, I was hoping there would be some lessons or, we look at contracts quite a bit. I know you've done municipal police contracts, and sometimes that stuff is really clearly laid out, and sometimes it just isn't. I don't know. I feel like the default shouldn't be hiding information. Maybe that's the problem that I have.
Yeah, absolutely. Which, I think is why FOIA exists in the first place, both on a state level and on the federal level. And I wish I could tell you that $94,000 was at the high end of what I've heard quoted for just to access public records, but it isn't. And, right, obviously I'm, the FOI reporter, I think is my reputation has become. So I deal with this stuff a lot. And I think a lot of people expect that, transparency is this thing that exists. And we have really well-intentioned laws like FOI, here in Connecticut. And I think people think, great, we have transparency. I'm just going to go request these records and they're going to come back to me. And unfortunately, that's not what happens. And, again, government's the low-hanging fruit. Government's what we're dealing with FOIA. There are loopholes in that law, right? Connecticut, excuse me, Connecticut famously does not have a time limit on how long agencies have to respond to your request. So, it's really easy to stonewall people, which we've done an investigation on, and to get around, that transparency law. And, when government does things like that, obviously there are cases where, if I request, 5 years worth of email communications, sure, it's probably going to be expensive and sure, it's probably going to take time. But when, people aren't complying with those requests otherwise, or trying to help accommodate you and say, hey, this is a burdensome request for us. What can we do to narrow it down, right? I just had a request into, I think it was Deep yesterday, where the FOI officer came back and said, we're getting lots of records for your request. They aren't relevant to what you're actually searching for. Here's a couple of search terms that we could go with, but, advise me on what you want to do next. That's great. That's what government should be doing to be transparent, even though it's probably not going to be in that agency's best interest when I do get those records, because it involves something that's a little fishy. But, when you have those transparency laws and, that low-hanging fruit of complying with them just isn't happening, that's really frustrating. And it's frustrating, for me as a journalist, and I have a lot of resources that I can use to try to get around that. But, the average citizen doesn't necessarily. They don't necessarily know how to deal with it. It's a legal process when you are dealing with an agency that's not complying, and that's burdensome and can be expensive and time consuming. And frankly, it's scary anytime you have to deal with the court system, and it's, that level of thing that I think it's certainly frustrating to me, and I imagine it's much more frustrating to people who don't have the resources that we have as a newsroom.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to think that we could help too. That's a kind of a nice service that we're able to offer when people reach out and they're either confused about the process or, hey, I got these documents back, but I don't feel like they're complete. How do I challenge it? It's really nice to have you on the team, but also Connecticut and New England does have a really nice network of people who are willing to help, free legal help, legal centers, just people who just care about transparency, who are willing to devote their time and money to help uncover whatever it is. It doesn't even really matter. And I think that's probably the biggest positive when we talk about transparency is it's a bridge builder. We're able
Yeah.
to bring people together. It doesn't matter really what the belief system is, or there's so many isms that kind of tear people apart and sort them into groups. It's amazing when we could just say, what if we just figured out what was going on? And that's something people rally around. I don't know. We like making friends here.
Yeah,
And that's much better than making
absolutely.
enemies generally.
Right. Yep. And great shameless plug for us. If you have FOI stories, send them to
Yeah.
us. I love to cover them. I'm working on one right now. And like you say, we do have, good resources. People like the New England First Amendment Coalition is a great organization. They've helped us before in the past. And, they're certainly not the only ones. So there are other resources out there. If you don't know where to start with them, I do. So again, shoot me an email, send us a tip, and we'll try to help, as much as we can in the interest of transparency.
Catherine at insideinvestigator.org. Also, Proton Mail, encrypted, Twitter, all over the place. You can reach Catherine. Um, I want to talk about your investigation, and I feel like let's make that shift now. So it's called Digging In, Cemetery Association Transparency. And I'll just start with the very beginning. It starts with a man's promise to a dying friend in Wallingford that kind of opened up a can of worms, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This is, kind of a crazy story that involves, cemeteries and FOIA. So, just really interesting stuff. And what it comes down to is, cemetery associations, which are, the organizations that manage cemeteries, are regulated by the state in certain ways. They have to comply with certain requirements relating to burials, relating to letting people know when burials occur, all that sort of thing. And, the issue here is Bill Comerford, who lives in Wallingford, where the Center Street Cemetery Association, which goes back hundreds of years, it's a historic cemetery. Um, believe it was in the 1800s. Initially, they formed an agreement with the town to manage the cemetery because the cemetery association had fallen in disrepair. Fast forward 200 years to, I think it's roughly a decade ago that this story begins. Bill Comerford promises a dying friend that he's going to look into the cemetery association. And what he says he uncovered is that burial reports were not being submitted to the town by the people responsible for it at the cemetery association, which is illegal. There's a fine of, I believe it's $100 a day for each burial that isn't reported. So, obviously he's concerned about this, and we do have records that indicate that this was happening. And so what he tries to do is go to the cemetery association and get records about their meetings. Initially, he goes in kind of informally because he was initially a member, but there's, a dust up, a falling out between him and the cemetery association. There's more on that in the story. But so then he goes to FOI and tries to get these meeting minutes through FOI, and they refuse. So he tries to submit a public records request or public records complaint and say, hey, there's an issue here, they deny my request. They shouldn't. And the story goes to the FOIC, which adjudicates these type of things. What it comes down to is the FOIC says that even though the association has an agreement with the town to manage the cemetery, even though they receive public funding, both things that you would think means that they're subject to public transparency laws. That's actually not the case. They're actually a private organization and therefore not subject to FOI. So, that's kind of the basics of the case. And, a concern, obviously, anytime someone is getting public funding and you can't do that basic oversight and there's no transparency, that's a concern. But, there's also allegations of criminality here and not reporting, submitting those death reports. So, again, another reason why you might want public records.
I really feel like I should have thought of the title Black Box for this, and it just occurred to me now because it is, right? Like if you can't see what's going on, with public money, Wallingford, I guess it's every person in Wallingford who is paying for this and their money is being shoveled into this black box. We really can't figure out what's going on. The other part of this that I thought was interesting is when you wrote about it, when Bill, the subject of the story, or I guess impetus for the story, uh, started tweeting about it, the the line that you both took independently was, "We are still scratching the surface of this, despite the fact that we are thousands of words in this investigation." So I'm not going to ask you to, speculate on what else is out there, but I do think that it's worth mentioning there are more things to be uncovered. We don't quite know if there are issues with other cemetery associations, but these built-in protections and the lack of transparency seems to be problematic because, I mean, you you want to know where your deceased relatives are buried or have these public records. I mean, there's an honor and respect piece that I think is culturally ingrained in Connecticut. There's a reason that these are filed. Uh, I don't think that we've heard yet from many people though who are upset about their relatives and that information not being known. But that's certainly part of it. There's a cultural element here that's yet to be explored. Am I overstating that?
No, I don't think so. I mean, we didn't get into it in this particular piece, but there has been previous coverage about Bill and his involvement with the Cemetery Association. And one of the allegations is basically because, this is a very old cemetery. It, predates America's, founding as a country. So there's allegations that, the cemetery used to extend beyond where it is now. So there's potentially bodies buried under what is now, a commercial street. In Wallingford, there's allegations that, it was used as, a burial plot, even before the town was formally incorporated. So there are potentially indigents who are buried there. There are potentially slaves who are buried there. So there are potentially scandals related to that. And, obviously, anytime you have to exhume bodies, anytime you have to dig up bodies, or you have to deal with, certain things that are in America's past and that are, pretty shameful, people are going to get upset about that and there are going to be controversies around it. So, that is a potential motive. And I'm not saying that that's what's motivating, excuse me, the Cemetery Association here. That's speculation. I don't know. But there are potential, motives for not wanting to do things here. And that's a reason to investigate, right? Even if we find nothing, that's part of news. Sometimes we investigate things and we don't find anything. But if we see, a thread that we can pull and say, gee, maybe there's something there, we want to do that in the interest of transparency. And, because of the FOIC's ruling here, because a court upheld this ruling, Representative Craig Fishbein, who is also on the Wallingford Town Council and also represented Bill in this case, tried to pass a law in the legislature to fix this issue. It didn't end up going through, but, because that is the situation that we find ourselves in, all of this stuff, we can't know the answers to because it's, not considered public information.
That's so tough. That's so tough. Again, I feel like, transparency is a day in and day out conversation for us and wanting to have this access, mostly because I think 99% of the time, I'd like to believe that people are doing the right thing. They're at least trying to, and, the mistakes that are made are uh, inadvertent and, people are looking out for each other. But that 1% could still be quite a bit, certainly enough to keep us busy in our newsroom and newspapers across Connecticut. I mean, that's the job. Again, not to advocate for any particular fix, but to make sure that those people who are impassioned and care and want to see better in their community can do so in an informed and educated way. we take that very seriously. It turns out we think that that's pretty important. That's the whole job.
Yeah,
Um, is there
right.
anything else related to that investment? Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off
No,
there.
I was just going to add to that, right? I think what FOIA fundamentally recognizes as a transparency law is there are all sorts of reasons for public information to be out there and very few reasons for it not to be out there. And those few reasons that it shouldn't be out there are protected. But, I think the status quo and the assumption is that information should be out there, whether for good, or for ill. And unfortunately, that's, not the case here because of this black box, as you put it.
Well, as always, tips are welcome. Information about what's going on in Wallingford, but also anything that anyone is aware of happening in your hometown across Connecticut. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We get a lot of tips, but I really think that we could use more. We'll take them. That's great. It allows us to pick the stories that we could do the most with. So it is greatly appreciated. Um, Anything else on your mind that you wanted to cover today, or otherwise, I'm happy to sign off.
No, I don't think so. I think we're good. I don't think there's any breaking news out there that we
That's
have to
good.
share. Right?
Very
We got some controversial signs in Connecticut now, but that's about
yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. We gotta read up on that. Connecticut's new welcome signs. Really, I think just poking the bear across New England and elsewhere. So
that made local news in Rhode Island this morning.
really,
Yes.
okay. All
Yeah.
right. Yeah, I saw the governor of New Jersey was really needling as well. So up in arms on state lines. We'll keep that
That's
in
a good
mind.
investigation title.
All right, thank you. I'm just full of them. I'm really just here for headline writing. That's it. So,
Well, I have to say that's my least favorite part of journalism. So that's a good resource to have.
happy to help, truly. All right. Well, cool. Institutionally, then, I'll just say we are so excited. We got a new reporter starting in a few weeks. We've got more stories to write. We have a host of investigation drafts that came in that will be scheduled shortly. Um, whether you, dear reader, listener, watcher, are tuning in via radio, Roku, Amazon TV, Apple TV, YouTube, social media, or somewhere else, please be sure to head over to insideinvestigator.org and sign up for our free emails. You'll be joining, as I said before, 10,000 subscribers who trust us to provide news and journalism to root out corruption in Connecticut. And we'd love to have you. So we will see you next time. And until then, be well, stay safe, and stay informed.